Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the step-by-step logic of Robert Nozick's political philosophy. To really get this, I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine you and your friends have just been dropped onto this massive, completely deserted island. I mean, there are no rules, no police, zero taxes, absolutely no government. For a hot minute, it feels like the ultimate freedom, right?
But, well, let's think about this. While an island with no authority figures sounds like a total dream, we kinda quickly run into some serious real-world security problems. I mean, what happens if someone just comes along and steals the shelter you spent 3 days building? Or what if a group decides they suddenly own the only fresh water stream on the whole island, and they start charging everyone else a ridiculous fee just to take a sip? Suddenly, we're forced to ask a really fundamental question. Do we actually need a state? And if we build one just to protect us, won't it eventually just grow and take away the very freedom we came to the island to enjoy in the first place?
Okay, let's jump right into part one, the state of nature.
So let's start with a blank slate. This is the philosophical baseline where literally no government exists. Drawing on John Locke, Nozick actually doesn't view this blank slate as some chaotic, violent nightmare. Instead, I want you to imagine drawing an invisible bubble around yourself. These are your absolute natural rights: life, liberty, and property. They act as hard, non-negotiable boundaries. You own yourself, and you keep exactly what you work for. And for Nozick, these aren't just polite suggestions. They are absolute constraints. They absolutely cannot be violated, not even for the so-called greater good.
To test just how absolute these rights really are, Nozick strictly enforces them with this concept he calls the utility monster. Just imagine a hypothetical creature that gets, say, 1,000 times more happiness from eating your favorite video game console than you get from playing it. Now, if the goal of society is just to maximize overall happiness, you logically should give your console to the monster, right? But Nozick says, absolutely not. No way. This shows that you can never, ever be used merely as a tool or a resource for someone else's happiness, regardless of the overall benefit to society. That invisible bubble of yours, it is completely impenetrable.
Which brings us to section 2, building the minimal state.
Now, we have these absolute rights, but let's be real. Defending your own bubble 24/7 is basically impossible. You gotta sleep sometime. So, Nozick argues a free market solution would naturally emerge on our whiteboard island. At first, it's everyone for themselves. Then, people might form neighborhood watches. Eventually, folks get tired of staying up all night, so they pool their money to hire paid private security clubs. He calls these mutual protection associations, or MPAs. Over time, these different clubs are going to compete, negotiate, and eventually merge to avoid super expensive conflicts. This naturally results in one giant monopoly, the Dominant Protective Association, or DPA.
Okay, so here's the crucial point. When exactly does this giant security company become an actual government? Nozick says a state needs two things: a monopoly on force and universal protection. You see, the DPA inevitably has to stop independent, vigilante hermits from carrying out their own unpredictable justice against the DPA's paying clients. But because stopping these hermits technically violates their right to self-defense, the DPA actually has to compensate them. How? By offering them free protection. So by absorbing literally everyone into its protective umbrella and holding the monopoly on force, this massive security company naturally crosses that invisible line. Without anyone even intending to build a government, boom, we've created a true minimal state.
Moving right along to section 3, wealth and Wilt Chamberlain.
So now that we have this tiny night watchman state where its only job is just to protect people, we have to ask, should the government do more? Like, should it redistribute wealth? Nozick argues absolutely not. He believes wealth isn't just some pie that falls from the sky waiting to be perfectly sliced up by politicians. Instead, wealth belongs entirely to individuals, as long as it follows his 3 strict rules of entitlement theory. Rule 1, acquisition. You took it from nature fairly. Rule 2, transfer. You got it through a totally voluntary trade or gift. And Rule 3, rectification. Past thefts were properly compensated. If those rules are followed, whoever holds the wealth is absolutely entitled to it, period.
To prove why a centralized equal distribution just doesn't work in practice, Nozick offers his most famous thought experiment. Imagine a perfectly equal society. We'll call that Distribution 1. Now, imagine the basketball superstar Wilt Chamberlain says he'll only play if he gets 25 cents from every ticket sold. 1 million fans voluntarily drop a quarter into a special box to watch him play. Well, at the end of the season, we have Distribution 2. Wilt has $250,000, and everyone else is poorer by exactly 1/4. Sure, it's massive inequality, but every single trade was entirely voluntary. So Nozick asks, how can anyone possibly call this new distribution unfair?
And this right here illustrates his core thesis, perfectly captured in the quote, "Liberty upsets patterns."
The point is, maintaining any equal pattern of wealth means the government literally has to constantly step in and interfere with your freedom to spend your own money. If people are genuinely free, inequality is going to naturally occur simply because people make different choices.
This takes us to Section 4, Taxation and the Proviso.
So if a government does decide to step in and reset that equal pattern, it has to use taxation. Imagine two people on a weekend. The worker decides to work extra hours so they can buy a $100 concert ticket. Meanwhile, the sleeper decides to just sleep in and watch the sunset for free. Then the government comes along and levies a 25% income tax. Think about what happens. The worker is penalized and has to pay $25, meaning they actually have to work even more hours just to afford that exact same ticket. But the sleeper, they pay absolutely nothing.
From this example, Nozick makes a highly controversial argument. He claims that taking a percentage of your earnings is mathematically and morally equivalent to forcing you to work for the state. Think about it. If the government takes 25% of your pay, they are essentially forcing you to work 2 hours out of an 8-hour day entirely for them without your explicit consent. For Nozick, this totally violates your absolute right to self-ownership. It is, in his own words, completely on par with forced labor.
But, Nozick isn't blind to reality. To prevent absolute disaster in this pure free market, he introduces an essential exception. It's called the Lockean Proviso. Basically, it states you can acquire property from nature, but only if you leave enough for others. For instance, you can't just go and buy up the only water holes in a desert and charge a fortune for a drink. Why? Because doing so removes other people's basic ability to survive. You can totally invent a new medicine and charge for it, because that adds an option that wasn't there before, but you cannot monopolize a pre-existing necessity for life.
All right, Section 5, the Meta-Utopia Framework.
Up to this point, I know Nozick's minimal state probably sounds a bit cold, maybe even hyper-individualistic, but he actually flips this assumption on its head with a pretty brilliant realization. No single lifestyle suits everyone. Instead of forcing one grand vision on all of society, his minimal state acts as a protective umbrella, a meta-utopia, where radically diverse communities can thrive right side by side. You want to start a socialist commune where everyone shares everything? Go for it. The minimal state will protect your right to do exactly that. Prefer a tech-driven, hyper-capitalist city? You can build that right next door. It's essentially a garden of utopias, with one strict rule. Membership in any of them must be 100% voluntary.
And finally, Section 6, Critiques and Conclusions. To truly understand this philosophy impartially, we really have to look at the modern pushback against Nozick's theories. First up is the starting points problem. See, Nozick argues that if every trade was fair, then today's wealth distribution is inherently just. But critics rightly point out that real human history just isn't a clean slate. It's filled with colonization, slavery, and stolen land. Because our historical baseline is fundamentally ruined by past theft and violence, critics argue that applying Nozick's strict rules today would really just lock in those unfair advantages gained by past injustices.
Next, we have the social contract debate. Many people passionately reject Nozick's idea that taxation equals forced labor. Instead, critics view taxes as a necessary social contract. Think of it this way. You benefit from roads, clean water, education, and the very security that Nozick himself values so highly. Therefore, paying a portion of your income isn't theft, and it certainly isn't slavery. It's simply paying your fair share for the societal infrastructure that allowed you to earn that wealth in the first place. Finally, there's the safety net concern. Nozick genuinely believed that in a minimal state, private charity and voluntary community support would naturally step up to help those who fall on hard times. Critics, however, worry that relying entirely on voluntary charity is incredibly risky when we're talking about real human lives. Without guaranteed government safety nets, like public health care or food assistance, they argue that the sick, the elderly, and the most vulnerable people could way too easily fall through the cracks.
And that brings us to the end of our explainer. Whether you totally align with Nozick's hyper-free market framework or you passionately demand a stronger government safety net, his work really forces us to look in the mirror. It leaves us wrestling with an incredibly tough, perhaps unanswerable trade-off. So I'll leave you with this. Exactly how much of your personal freedom are you willing to hand over to the state in exchange for security and equality? And how much are you absolutely determined to keep for yourself? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep asking the big questions.
Please like and subscribe.